Joseph Colombo Sr., a name that conjures up images of power, respect, and fear within the world of organized crime. As the boss of the Colombo Crime Family, one of the infamous 5 families that dominated the New York underworld, Joe Colombo was a force to be reckoned with. But he was also a man of contradictions, a ruthless criminal who became an unlikely champion of Italian-American civil rights. In this episode, we'll explore the complex and controversial life of Joe Colombo, from his early years as a street hustler in Brooklyn to his rise to power as mob boss. We'll examine the key events that shaped his criminal career, including his war against the FBI and his founding of the Italian-American Civil Rights League. But we'll also look into the darker side of Colombo's legacy, the violence, corruption, and betrayal that were a daily part of the life in the Mafia. We'll explore the mystery surrounding the attempt on Colombo's life that left him paralyzed, and the power struggles within the Colombo family that followed. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride through the life and times of Joe Colombo, the godfather of civil rights and one of the most fascinating figures in the history of American Mafia. Warning: the following video is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Viewer discretion is advised. Keep watching until the end to see what's next on Apex Crime Lords. Joseph Anthony Colombo Sr. was born on June 16, 1923 in Brooklyn, New York. He was the youngest of 5 children born to Anthony Colombo and his wife Josephine. Anthony was an Italian immigrant who worked as a longshoreman. Growing up in the tough streets of Brooklyn, the young Joe Colombo quickly learned the value of toughness and street smarts. He dropped out of high school in the 9th grade and began working odd jobs to support his family. But he also found himself drawn to the world of crime, running errands for local gangsters and learning the ropes of the underworld. In the 1940s, Colombo began working for the Colombo Crime Family, one of the original 5 families of the New York Mafia. He started out as a lowly associate, but quickly worked his way up through the ranks due to his intelligence, ambition, and ruthless efficiency. By the 1950s, he'd become a trusted lieutenant of the family boss, Joe Profaci, overseeing the family's gambling and loan sharking operations. But Colombo's rise to power was not without its challenges. In the late 1950s, the Profaci family became involved in a bitter internal conflict known as the Banana War, which pitted Colombo and other younger, more ambitious members against the old guard loyal to Profaci. The war erupted into violence, with bombings, shootings, and kidnappings becoming commonplace. Colombo emerged from the Banana War as a rising star in the Profaci family, but he also made some powerful enemies. In 1961, he was shot and wounded by a rival gangster, but survived the attack. The following year, Profaci died of cancer, and Colombo's ally, Joseph Magliocco, took over as boss. But Magliocco's reign was short-lived. In 1963, he was forced to step down after the Commission, the governing body of the American Mafia, discovered that he had plotted to have several rival bosses killed. Colombo, who had been a key player in exposing the plot, was named as the new boss of the family, which was now called the Colombo family in his honor. As boss, Colombo quickly set about consolidating his power and expanding the family's criminal enterprises. He was known as a shrewd and calculating leader, but also one that wasn't afraid to use violence when necessary. Under his leadership, the Colombo family became one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations in New York, with interests in everything from gambling and loan sharking to labor racketeering and drug trafficking. But Colombo's reign was also marked by a growing sense of unease within the Mafia. The FBI, which was under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, was ramping up its efforts to crack down on organized crime, and Colombo and his fellow bosses found themselves under increasing scrutiny. It was a situation that would lead Colombo to take surprising and a controversial stand, one that would make him a hero to some and a villain to others. As the 1960s progressed, Joe Colombo found himself at the center of a growing storm. The FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, was ramping up its efforts to take down the Mafia, and Colombo and his fellow bosses were squarely in their sights. Wiretaps, surveillance, and informants were all being used to gather evidence against the mob, and the pressure was starting to mount. But Colombo was not one to back down from a fight. Instead, he decided to take the battle to the FBI, using a surprising weapon, the media. In 1970, Colombo founded the Italian-American Civil Rights League, an organization dedicated to fighting what he saw as the unfair stereotyping and persecution of Italian Americans by law enforcement and the media, out by a young man named Jerome Johnson, who was quickly gunned down by Colombo's bodyguards. The shooting left Colombo paralyzed from the neck down and effectively ended his reign as boss of the Colombo family. But they would also face increasing pressure from law enforcement, as well as internal power struggles and betrayals. The glory days of the Colombo family were coming to an end, and a new era of organized crime was beginning. After the attempt on his life in 1971, Joe Colombo was left paralyzed and unable to speak, but even in his weakened state, he remained a powerful and influential figure in the New York underworld. His family rallied around him, and his brother Anthony "Sonny" Colombo took over as acting boss of the family. Sonny Colombo was killed in a car bombing, leaving a power vacuum at the top of the family. A bitter struggle for control ensued, with rival factions vying for supremacy. Throughout this period of turmoil, Joe Colombo remained a symbolic figurehead of the family, even as his health continued to decline. He was revered by many in the Italian-American community as a hero and a martyr, a man who had sacrificed everything for the cause of civil rights. But to others, he was a reminder of the violence and corruption that had long plagued the Mafia. As the years passed, the Colombo family's power and influence began to wane. New York's Mafia was entering a period of decline, as law enforcement cracked down on organized crime and younger generations of Italian Americans assimilated into the mainstream society. The old ways of the mob were becoming increasingly obsolete, and the once mighty Colombo family was struggling to adapt. Joe Colombo himself passed away in 1978, 7 years after the shooting that had left him paralyzed. His legacy, however, would live on, both as a symbol of the Mafia's power and excess. The decline of the Colombo crime family was a gradual process, one that began in the 1970s and continued through the 1980s and beyond. A combination of factors, including increased law enforcement pressure, internal power struggles, and changing social attitudes towards organized crime, all contributed to the family's fall from grace. One of the biggest blows to the Colombo family came in the mid-1980s, when several high-ranking members were indicted on racketeering charges. This case was known as the Colombo trial, and was one of the longest and most complex in Mafia history, involving dozens of defendants and hundreds of hours of wiretap evidence. The trial was a major victory for law enforcement and a devastating blow to the Colombo family. Several key members of the family, including acting family boss Carmine Jr. Persico, and underboss Gennaro Jerry Langella, were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The convictions left the family in disarray, with no clear leader and a power vacuum at the top, and turncoats and informants continued to provide valuable information to law enforcement. The family's once tight grip on its criminal enterprises began to loosen, as younger, hungrier criminals moved in to fill the void. At the same time, the Mafia as a whole was facing increasing pressures from law enforcement and a changing cultural landscape. The glory days of the mob, when figures like Joe Colombo could operate with impunity and even be celebrated as folk heroes, were long gone. The public's fascination with the Mafia had given way to a growing awareness of the violence and corruption that were an internal part of organized crime. For the Colombo family, the final blow came in the early 1990s, when a massive federal investigation known as Operation Gangplank resulted in the indictment of dozens of high-ranking members on charges ranging from racketeering to murder. The case was a testament to the government's determination to root out organized crime, and a stark reminder of how far the Colombo family had fallen. In the end, the once mighty Colombo crime family was left as a shell of its former self. Its power and influence had greatly diminished. Many of its top leaders were behind bars or in hiding, and its criminal enterprises were in shambles. The family that Joe Colombo had once ruled with an iron fist had become a shadow of its former self, a cautionary tale of the dangers of arrogance and the inevitability of justice. The story of Joe Colombo and the Colombo crime family is a complex and fascinating one, full of larger-than-life characters, shocking violence, and unexpected twists and turns. It's a tale that speaks of the enduring allure of the American Mafia in pop culture, but it also points to the dark realities of life in the underworld. On one level, Joe Colombo's rise to power is a classic American success story. A poor immigrant son who used his street smarts and ruthless ambition to climb to the top of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. his founding of the American Civil Rights League, and his public crusade against FBI harassment made him a hero to some and the symbol of ethnic pride and defiance. But Colombo's story is also a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and the ultimate futility of a life in crime. Despite his wealth and influence, Colombo's reign as boss of the Colombo family was marked by constant conflict, betrayal, and violence. His efforts to present himself as a champion of civil rights were undercut by his own criminal activities and his ultimate fate, paralyzed by an assassin's bullet and dying in obscurity. It serves as a stark reminder of the price of life in the Mafia. In the end, the story of the Colombo crime family is not just about one man or one organization, but about the larger forces that have shaped the American underworld for generations. It's a story of greed and ambition, of loyalty and betrayal, and the human capacity for both great good and great evil. As we reflect on the legacy of Joe Colombo and the world that he inhabited, it's important to remember that the Mafia is not some romantic relic of a bygone era, but a very real and very dangerous criminal enterprise that has left a trail of death and destruction in its wake. While figures like Colombo may be fascinating from a distance, we must never lose sight of the human cost of organized crime, or the bravery of those who have risked everything to bring its perpetrator. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.